It was barely 7:15 a.m. But the briefing room at Randolph Air Force Base already felt like midday. Coffee cups steamed on the edges of cluttered tables, and tension hung thick in the air. The fluorescent lights buzzed above a group of senior officers, all mid-discussion. Voices layered over one another as they pored over the crash reports. A T-6 Texan II had gone down 2 days ago during a routine training flight. No casualties. But the telemetry was scrambled. The black box was damaged. Answers were few, and patience was thinning. Colonel Grant Walker stood near the head of the table, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Decades in the Air Force had taught him how to read a room. This one was running out of time and trust. He scanned the list of incoming personnel just as the door opened. Boots on tile, soft steps. A shadow moved into the room. Cadet Nora Bell stepped through. Slight in build, uniform perfectly pressed, chin high, but expression unreadable. She looked like she didn't belong. Too young, too quiet, too lightweight. A few officers glanced up from their notes. One raised an eyebrow. Another leaned over to a colleague and whispered just loud enough to be heard. Walker didn't look at her at first. His eyes were still on the roster. He found her name, then paused. His thumb rested just beneath the call sign listed next to it. Ekochin. His lips moved before he meant them to. Echo 9. The words came out low but clear. They landed in the middle of the room like a dropped wrench. Silence. Even the sound of a pen scratching paper stopped. Chair shifted. Eyes turned. The whispering ceased. Walker finally looked up. He stared at Nora longer than he probably should have. Expression neutral, but cautious. He hadn't expected that call sign, and from the way the room reacted, neither had anyone else. He knew the name. Everyone did. It was passed around in maintenance hangars, murmured by night crews on long shifts, a name that showed up in after-action reports, usually with redacted lines and unofficial footnotes, but never attached to a cadet. Nora didn't say a word. She didn't flinch or offer an explanation. She just stood there, waiting, calm, still, like someone who had walked into dozens of rooms like this before and had never needed to speak to be heard, and for a long moment, she didn't have to. Nora Bell wasn't the kind of cadet anyone noticed twice. She barely cleared 5'4". Her boots always looked too new. Her posture too quiet. Around the officer training school halls, she blended in like furniture. She didn't linger in the common areas, didn't joke during drills, didn't draw lines in sand to prove anything. To most, she was the quiet one in the back of the room, the cadet who raised her hand only when called. Some thought she lacked confidence. Others just didn't think about her at all. But there was something off. Not wrong. Just out of place. Like she didn't fully belong with the rest of the class. But not in the way you'd expect. It was more like she had already done this before and didn't see the need to perform it again. In the mess hall, people whispered. She was older than the rest by a few years, not by much, but enough to make her feel like she came from a different track. A few cadets found her file once during a base systems glitch. Not much was there, but someone recognized a note. Former crew chief, a 10 Thunderbolt Secondo. 2 tours in Kandahar. Someone scoffed. No way that small woman was wrenching on warthogs. But a few of the maintainers confirmed it. She'd been a legend downrange. No one in her squad had ever had to abort for maintenance failure. Not once. She didn't just do the work. She understood the machines like they were living things. Rumor was, she could listen to an engine run and tell you what bolt needed, torque adjustment. No checklist. No diagnostics. Just her ears. The call sign Echo 9 wasn't something she chose. It came from an incident back in Afghanistan. An A-10 had gone down after takeoff. No obvious signs of failure. The investigation was stalled for days. Engineers were throwing darts in the dark. And then Nora asked to hear the black box, audio only. She sat in a room for 10 minutes with nothing but engine whine, pilot breathing, and cockpit chatter. When she came out, she handed over a yellow legal pad with 3 notes. Right side compressor surge. Prop governor delay. Cockpit warning muted manually. The cause was confirmed 2 days later. The report went up the chain. Someone stamped it. Classified. But the nickname stuck. Echo for how she heard what no one else could. 9. Because she had solved 9 flight incidents. That deployment alone. Still, when she walked into a new room, none of that came with her. Just the pressed uniform, the unreadable face, the quiet. To the officers now watching her at Randolph, she was a cadet with a reputation that didn't make sense. Echo 9 sounded like the kind of name that belonged to some spec ops ghost or electronic warfare analyst. Not to a girl who looked like she should be studying pre-med and drinking black coffee from a paper cup. But some of them, not all, just a few, were starting to wonder. It was a clear morning, just past 8:30 a.m., when Nora Bell climbed into the back seat of the T6 Texan II. The sortie was routine, an hour of maneuvers, pattern work, then back for a debrief. Her instructor, Captain Mahoney, was a sharp flyer, confident, liked to test students with silent pressure. He gave her a nod through the mirror, adjusted his headset, and called Tower for clearance. She responded calmly. Checklist memorized down to finger motion. It was supposed to be just another step in training. They were 20 minutes into the flight, west of the base. When Nora heard it, a slight shift in pitch, a vibration through the airframe that didn't match the usual prop wash. Then came the drop. Oil pressure slide low. Fast. Mahoney noticed it too. He tapped the gauge, squinted, then keyed the comm. He stayed calm, but she could hear the edge in his voice. RTB. Return to base. Caution light flickering. He began a slow bank. Nora scanned the panel again. Her eyes weren't on the lights. They were listening. The prop didn't sound like cavitation or a fluid leak. It was offbeat, like timing had slipped or something deeper had cracked loose. They leveled off and began their descent. At 500 feet, Mahoney's voice cut off mid-sentence. She looked forward and saw his helmet tilt. One hand on the throttle, the other limp. He wasn't responding. Nora acted instantly. She keyed the intercom. No answer. Her fingers reached forward over the seatback. Mixture idle cutoff. Prop lever feathered. She grabbed the stick from the rear cockpit and adjusted pitch. Holding glide slope toward the auxiliary runway. Tower kept hailing the call sign. She kept her tone even. Declared emergency. Unresponsive instructor. Executing power off landing. She brought them down in one smooth arc. Gear down. Flaps 30. The tires hit hard but clean. Nose wheel tracked centerline. At 0902, the T6 rolled to a stop near midfield. She popped the canopy and climbed out before ground crew arrived. Mahoney was still breathing. Pulse faint. Skin pale. She pulled his harness, stabilized his airway, and flagged down medics by hand. Then, while they worked, she took out her notepad and began sketching the landing path. Wind direction, and engine status at every stage. By 9:15 a.m., the aircraft was in hangar inspection. By 9:30, Mahoney was in cardiac care. They said it was a minor stroke. If they'd stayed airborne 5 minutes longer, it would have been fatal. Later that week, she read the after-action report. Her name was mentioned once. Cadet Bell assisted post-landing coordination. No mention of her flying the final descent. No credit for managing the emergency. No line about how she knew something was wrong before the gauges said so. It didn't surprise her. She just folded the report, slid it into her notebook, and moved on. The room was colder than it needed to be. The AC unit hummed softly against the back wall. and the lights overhead gave off that sterile kind of brightness meant for long hours and tired eyes. It was 10:20 a.m. when Colonel Grant Walker stepped into the analysis bay and called for Nora Bell. 4 officers and 2 engineers were already there. Hunched over displays of half-decoded telemetry and distorted cockpit audio from the training flight that went down last week. Nothing obvious stood out. One magneto had failed. Maybe both. The checklist sequence seemed off, but nobody could say for sure what happened or why the engine lost rhythm before the spin began. Walker didn't say much. He just gestured for Nora to sit. They handed her a headset. No visual. Just audio. Raw cockpit channel. The waveform hadn't been cleaned yet. Static fuzzed at the edges. A few murmurs passed between the engineers. Some of them still weren't convinced she should even be there. She nodded once, placed the headset over her ears, and closed her eyes. The room fell silent, except for the soft tick of the wall clock and the occasional squeak of a boot shifting on the tile floor. She listened for about 40 seconds. No notes, no keyboard, no rewinding. Then she took off the headset and looked at Walker. Left magneto failure. Progressive, misfire, cascade. Engine stumbled under load. Instructor went to checklist Bravo instead of Alpha. That delay widened the power gap and locked the mixture. Then they lost combustion symmetry. Altitude and speed did the rest. No dramatics. Just data. Said like she was explaining why toast had burned in the oven. One of the engineers blinked. Another shifted his eyes to Walker. Nobody spoke right away. They didn't have to. She just said what 6 hours of decoding and 24 diagnostic simulations hadn't yet confirmed. Walker didn't smile, but his brow lifted slightly. The tension that usually hung around his shoulders loosened. Just a notch. He nodded once. 3 hours later, the final report came in from the avionics team. Everything she'd said matched line for line. None of it was on a chalkboard. None of it had been projected onto a screen. She had heard it in the hum of the engine, in the rhythm of the pilot's breathing, in the 2-second hesitation before a switch had clicked. That night, someone wrote Echo 9 on the corner of the whiteboard next to the day's findings. Just small letters. No one said who did it. Walker never brought it up again. But the next morning, when she walked into the same room at 7:15 a.m., no one questioned why she was there. The call came through at 19:45, or 7:45 p.m. Just as the sun slipped behind the mountains near Tucson, a UAV had gone dark south of the Arizona-Mexico border. Last ping placed it in a narrow ravine, known for cartel activity and bad comms. The data feed cut mid-transmission. Electronic interference was suspected. Colonel Walker didn't wait. The site was too remote and too hot to wait for a full diagnostics team. He pointed at Nora Bell's name without hesitation. She was on the next bird out, riding with the quick reaction team on a UH-60 Blackhawk, headed south under red cabin lights and low chatter. They touched down outside grid 10 seconds, NV45679984, around 20:30 p.m. The air was dry and thick with dust. Night vision turned the desert into a pale green blur. The moment boots hit dirt, a crack echoed from the ridge. Contact left. Small arms fire. 2 shooters across the border. Well placed. Disciplined. The team scattered for cover. Staff Surgeon Harris. The team lead took a round in the thigh and went down hard. That's when Nora moved. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She took a knee behind a boulder, pulled the sat map from Harris's vest, and drew in coordinates from memory. She'd been studying the grid since liftoff. The ravine walls, the likely blind spots, the path the UAV would have taken under low flight. She pointed to 2 soldiers and signaled flank security with hand gestures, 15-meter spread. West and northwest arcs. Her voice stayed even, clipped and clear as she got on comms. Specter 2-1. This is Echo 9. Grid, 10 seconds, NV 458699963. Visual on active fire. Requesting immediate close air support. Danger close. 100 meters. Red smoke pending. There was a pause, then acknowledgement from an A-10 orbiting north. Already on alert. Nora pulled a red smoke grenade, popped it uphill, and watched it bloom against the rocks. Wind was 5 knots northeast. She factored it in without thinking. The A-10's first pass came at 20:43 p.m. 30mm rounds tore across the ridge. Precise. Tight. Loud enough to shake your teeth. The shooters never fired again. For the next 10 minutes, Nora coordinated sweeps with the A-10 pilot, confirming heat signatures, clearing approach lanes. She relayed positions, called movement shifts, and kept her squad tight. No one else had to speak. She ran the net. At 20:56 p.m., the area was declared clear. Casualty 1. Non-life-threatening. Drone debris located. No loss of equipment. No loss of life. They loaded back onto the bird just past 21:10 p.m. The flight back was silent. In the debrief, no one said much. Just the usual reports. Formal phrasing. Mission codes. But 2 of the operators who had flanked west walked by Nora that night, outside the barracks. They didn't nod, didn't stop. But one of them said low enough for only her to hear, "You earned that call sign." And for the first time since she stepped into that desert, she let herself believe it. It was just past 10:20 a.m. when the door to the operations room opened and Nora Bell stepped through. Her boots still carried a trace of red dust from the landing zone. Her uniform smelled faintly of JP-8 and desert heat. The room was quiet, not the kind of silence that came from boredom or waiting, but the kind that pressed against your chest. No one said anything. Chair shifted. A few officers who had once questioned why she was even there now rose from their seats without thinking. Their eyes followed her, not out of curiosity, but out of something slower, heavier, respect. Colonel Walker stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes steady. He didn't offer a nod. He didn't smile, just studied her for a long second, as if weighing what had changed between the last time she walked into that room and now. She didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. He spoke only once. "You brought them all home." That was it. No debrief. No applause. No shake of the hand. The statement hung there. Sharp and simple. Every head in the room stayed still. No one dared break the quiet. Nora gave a slow nod. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to acknowledge what had been said, what had been earned. Then she turned, stepped back through the doorway, and left them in that silence. And none of them sat down until she was gone. It started small. Just a faint line on the back of a helmet. Then another. Beneath the control stick of a T6 parked near the edge of the ramp. Within a week, instructors began noticing it scratched into kneeboards, scribbled on maintenance whiteboards, etched softly into the corner of classroom desks. E9. No one explained it. No one needed to. It wasn't loud. Wasn't formal. It just appeared passed quietly from one cadet to another, like a story not meant to be shouted. Only carried. The ones who used to doubt her never issued apologies. They just changed the way they spoke when her name came up. More careful. More certain. They told the story without embellishment. No medals. No drama. Just what happened. As it happened. Nora Bell refused every interview. She missed every ceremony. When the base commander offered a commendation, she thanked him and stayed on the flight line. She didn't need a plaque. She already had what mattered. It was 7:15 a.m. when she walked out to the ramp alone. The sun was just beginning to warm the tarmac. The T6 Texandu sat quiet, dew drying slowly on its wings. She sat beside it, headset in her lap, wiping the lenses with slow, even care. She didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't say a word, but the thought came anyway. Soft and steady. They only remember the loud ones. But it's the quiet who save lives.